Hello everyone, welcome to the Buidl Radio. It's a podcast about crypto and cryptocurrency. My name is Andrei Sobel, and I give the floor to my colleague, my co-host Polina.
Hi everyone, nice to see you here again. So today we're talking with David, and I would ask David to introduce yourself and tell us what you're an expert in and what things we should ask you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. My name is David Mihal. I'm a developer, so I'm an expert in Ethereum, Solidity, kind of the whole Ethereum development ecosystem. I've been developing applications and stuff on Ethereum for about the last 4 or 5-ish years. Also just kind of, an expert in the wider crypto ecosystem, a lot of like kind of the DeFi space and things like that.
Right. And what would be the thing that you're not expert in and we should never ask you about that?
I think I'm not an expert in, it's interesting because crypto is getting to be a very large space. There's a lot of different expertise and different types of things in the space. One is, I'm not that bad at math. I did fine at math in school, but there's some people in crypto who like really understand. Some of these applications have like really high level math and high level cryptography in them. So I'm definitely not an expert at the really advanced math that's needed for lots of crypto things. And kind of on the other direction, lots of things in crypto try to solve, real like human coordination problems, things like, DAOs and organizations, things like that. So I'm not like an expert in, I think like the human side. That's something that's really tricky, kind of building these organizations. And I'd say that's not even something that's specific to crypto. Like people have been struggling trying to figure out how to best organize and coordinate people for all of history. But that's definitely not my strong area.
Gotcha. Governance always has been probably the hardest question in everywhere, I guess. All right. So I know that you've built one of the latest of your projects is cryptostats.community. And it's kind of warms my heart because there is so little products related to actually product management, statistics in blockchain. Like, how did you get to this idea? Why did you decide to build this? And what is the biggest insight you got when you finished it?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give the full background of that project. So the whole project started with a site that some of your listeners might know about called cryptofees.info. This is for anyone who doesn't know it, it's like a really simple website that just shows crypto protocols by their fee revenue. And it's all sorts of crypto protocols. So it's got layer 1s like Ethereum and Bitcoin. It's got, layer 2s like Arbitrum and Optimism. It has decentralized exchanges like Uniswap. It has lending protocols like Aave. It's got kind of any type of crypto protocol that's decentralized, and it has users paying some type of fee to the protocol. And I first made that site back in DeFi summer, back in the fun times of 2020. And I made it just because I was curious about this metric. I think I saw some people like talking about this metric on Twitter, and I wanted there to be a place where I could track that metric. So I made this really simple website in a couple hours. And, actually it was a few weeks after I built the site, I like just shared it on Twitter, and it surprised me that the site got a really big, a lot of traction. And not just when I shared it, kind of people kept coming back to it. So I kept improving the site for a bit. I was, people were reaching out, like lots of teams wanted their protocol to be added to the site. So they would reach out with that. And I started making kind of other sites that had other metrics. And the project was growing from there. Again, this was still just a side project, but I started to understand some of the problems in the like data metrics space. So one of them was that when you have sites like this that need bits of adapters to gather information, first of all, all the major protocols want to be listed on the site. So I have every DeFi project like messaging me saying, how do we get on the site? Trying to kind of put together code so they can get included. And on the other side, there were a lot of projects and companies coming to me saying, hey, we want this data. You have some really good data here, and we want to use it for our website, for our newsletter, for whatever. Is there an API? How can we get access to this? And so I kind of start to realize this is a bit of like, in some sense, like a marketplace problem. You have some people providing a service, like providing data, and others that want to consume the data. But it's also like a public good. The data we provide, and I believe all data should be like this, that data is free and should be free, especially when this data is coming from a blockchain. Like blockchain data is by definition open and transparent. And I think that the data metrics that are derived from blockchain data should also be open, free, transparent, like available to anybody. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me to take data that's already open and free, kind of do a little bit of processing and then charge money for it. So from there, kind of came up with the idea of building Cryptostats. And Cryptostats is a platform, a decentralized platform for, again, kind of ingesting this data from various data sources, kind of transforming it, normalizing it, and giving like a kind of a package data set to anyone that wants to consume it, which includes our websites. Again, we still run these websites like Cryptofees and l2fees, and we've got some other new ones in the pipeline. But we also give data to a bunch of other projects, sites like The Block, which is like a prominent crypto news website. There's Bloomberg, which I think most people will be familiar with Bloomberg, and a bunch of smaller projects as well. Some interesting data projects in the crypto space. So yeah, our goal is to make this data open, free, and available to everybody. And at the same time, again, we're still also trying to build these nice front ends, which help people understand like the fundamentals of data metrics. We want our sites to be like accessible to everybody, not just like data experts. So that's kind of the overview of the project and how we've gotten to where we are.
All right. Well, thank you for such a nice intro. I saw that on the Cryptofees website, I think like Near scored very low. There's actually so many blockchains that score really low on how much fees you pay in there, like compared to Ethereum at least. Like the question I had, like, are you sure you're measuring those right? I don't know. Or how do you do it because all the blockchains are so different, right?
Yeah, so this is the big challenge. And, when you look at something like Cryptofees, it looks like such a simple site, but behind the scenes, there's a lot of work to, basically everything on that list needs separate codes, separate indexers. We use the graph protocol a lot. Lots of tooling to aggregate that one little number. And so, yeah, of course, there are mistakes on the site sometimes, but I have a pretty strong confidence that the numbers on there are accurate. As you mentioned, like a lot of these layer ones are quite low. Mm-hmm. On some hand, that makes sense because a lot of these blockchains, they advertise low fees. That's kind of their value prop, right?
Mm-hmm. But
lots of layer ones will say,
it's like, I guess Ethereum has about 4 million today. I just saw it, and still like Near. What else is there at the bottom? Actually, there are so many of them. They do like about 10 times less, about 1,000 times less. It's like the margin is huge.
Yeah, it is a really like order of magnitude difference between. Well, first of all, between Ethereum and everything else. Binance Smart Chain is maybe the second one down. You've got kind of Binance Smart Chain and a few of those, and then like down the list, there's things like Near and other things there. I'll say that the Near one actually comes directly from an indexer run by the Near Foundation, the team behind Near. So, well, again, anybody can make mistakes, but I think you can think of people will ask, they'll say, oh, why is fee revenue a good metric for understanding blockchains when, again, you have things like Near and, Binance Smart Chain or Solana that have low fees low down the list. And people will say, well, that's a good thing. Like low fees are a good thing. I'll say, why is it a good thing that Ethereum has really high fees? I think you can definitely look at it under the framing of, yes, the fees are quite high on Ethereum, but its fees generally come from supply and demand. And even though the fees are high, people are willing to pay those fees, which is quite impressive. On the other hand, the way I like to think of fee revenue is that it's kind of the floor price for the value of a network, because when someone pays a fee, like, when someone sends a transaction on the layer 1, or someone makes a trade on a decentralized exchange, the amount of value they're getting out of that action is at least what the fee is, right? If I'm sending a transaction on Ethereum and I think this transaction is worth $1 to me, that's how much value I'm getting out, but the fee is $2, I'm probably not going to send that transaction. So people will pay up to what they perceive the value of the transaction to be. So that's why you can say with Ethereum, with any protocol that has high fees, the margin between the value of the transaction and the actual transaction fee might be a bit smaller. But with, say, a chain like Solana, where someone's paying a fraction of a cent to send a transaction, they're probably willing to spend, quite a bit more than that actual fee. If the fee went 10x and it was still a fraction of a cent, but, at 10x more, they might think nothing about it. So I think that's the framing that makes sense to me is this is like the lower bound of the value of an application or a protocol, but not necessarily the upper bound.
You mentioned fee as a metrics, but what other metrics is important? When you see some new protocols, what I should do if I see the new protocols, what I should check, what's the metric I should check before I try to do some business with this protocol?
It's a great question. So for me, certainly fee revenue is the metric that I'm the biggest fan of, and I think is the closest to strong fundamentals for a project. But the other big metric that people look at a lot is total value locked. I think that's definitely a good metric. It's not a perfect metric, but you can get a sense of how much value are people putting into the applications on this protocol. You'll see some chains that the chain itself is like maybe has the native asset has a large market cap, but there's not much total value locked. So that might indicate people aren't actually using DeFi on that chain. Now, of course, the problem with this is, first of all, there's many ways you can manipulate total value locked. If I make a token, I release a small amount of that token into the markets. So then the token has like a market cap, and I put, 90% of this token in some contract where it's just locked. I've now on paper created a really high total value locked, but I haven't actually created any value. And the amount of value locked is not actually it's a small fraction, or the amount locked compared to the amount that's liquid is so small that it's not the actual value locked. You can also compose, you can have, you put an asset into one protocol and then take the derivative and put it into another protocol. You can kind of loop value through. I know we saw some teams doing that on Solana to try to boost their value a lot. So there's a few issues with that. The other issue is that value locked in a protocol is not necessarily a good thing. I guess one example is if we look at Uniswap v3. I'm a big fan of Uniswap v3. I think it's a really cool model. And Uniswap v3 was really capital efficient. You only needed a little bit of value to get really good trading. So with something like Uniswap v3, it actually works just as well with less value locked. So those are some of the problems I think with total value locked. But that aside, there's a reason it is one of the most popular metrics. People will talk about total transactions on, a chain or on an exchange or something like that, which again is a metric that is not a bad metric, but it does have a number of issues. My biggest issue is that a transaction is not equal. One transaction on one chain is not necessarily equal to a transaction on another chain, or even on the same chain. If you're comparing a chain that people are just making token transfers against a chain where people are maybe doing some complex flash loan that has borrowing and lending and trading in one transaction, those are not equivalent. And I think as chains become more expensive, people will try to find techniques to combine multiple actions into a single transaction. So one example would be, if people are familiar with CowSwap, CowSwap is a cool decentralized exchange that will bundle a bunch of users' trades together, and a relayer will execute it against various liquidity sources. And with CowSwap, you have one transaction that might have one trade in it, or it might have 20 trades inside this single transaction. So that's an example of, if you have this transaction that executes 20 trades, that's only one transaction, but there's 20 different like user actions in a single transaction. So one thing I would like to see, and maybe this is a metric that we might try to build as part of Cryptostats, is breaking down not by just transactions, but by user actions. So like how many trades on decentralized exchanges, how many token transfers, things like that. So I think that would be a good metric. The last metric I'll mention would be just looking at things like value transferred. If you look at, this was one of the, I think the second site that we built after Cryptofees was called Money Movers. And Money Movers looks at the total volume of assets moved on, it showed Bitcoin versus Ethereum and maybe a few other chains. So you can look at those two and you can say like, which chains are people using to move large amounts of value? So maybe there's not so many transactions happening, but if people are moving like millions and millions of dollars on one chain, that's an interesting signal of which chains like the whales are using. So I think that was really interesting. We created that site back in 2020, and that was around when Ethereum first flipped Bitcoin as the chain that moves the most value. And for the most part, Ethereum has stayed the chain that moves more value than Bitcoin since then. With a few periods of time, Bitcoin has overtaken it, but for the most part, Ethereum is like the chain that is used for settling large amounts of value. Whereas I think Bitcoin maybe tends to be a chain that people just want to hold their value on.
And if you exclude the stable coins from this amount of transferring, is still Ethereum have more scores in this case? If you will exclude,
yeah, that's a great question. I would have to check. I'm not sure the current state of it. The way we showed on the site, we tried to only show assets that were kind of like money type assets, which were store of values like ETH and Bitcoin, as well as stable coins. So we don't show like governance tokens or things like that. I know at least a while ago, I think Bitcoin was still higher than Ethereum when you removed stablecoins. But yeah, again, I don't know the current state of that. One other thing you have to pay attention to is we show Ether and wrapped Ether separately. So, you can probably kind of think of those as one asset, because wrapped Ether is essentially just a very simple smart contract on top of Ether. So I'm not sure if you combine wrapped Ether and Ether together, if it's higher or lower than Bitcoin, but I think they're close. I think they're both kind of pretty competitive in terms of which chain is, or which asset is being moved more.
Okay, coming back to the list of the important metrics, you mentioned the fee, total value locked, and amount of money that's transferred. Do we have correlation between these three metrics? If we have correlation, what's the cause and what's the effect in this case?
So this was a correlation between which metrics?
Fee and total. Let's start from fee and total value locked.
That's a good question. So I haven't crunched these numbers myself. My intuition is that there's probably some correlation between those two. I know Ethereum is probably the chain that has the highest. It's definitely the chain that has the highest fees, and I believe it's probably the chain that has the highest total value locked by far. You would assume these are both metrics that are somewhat representative of usage, and so they should be correlated. My guess is maybe on some of the smaller chains might be where we see some divergence. There might be some chains that have really high value locked, but maybe not so much fees, not so many people actually using it, or vice versa. There might be some chains that have, maybe a chain that's mostly used for payments. There might be people transferring a lot, but there's not much total value locked, because that's, you can look at a chain like Bitcoin where there's essentially no applications on Bitcoin, so all it has are fees. The total value locked is basically zero, or maybe the small amount of Bitcoin that's in Lightning Network.
Yeah, so you also have a website talking about layer 2 fees. Can you elaborate a little bit more on layer 2? Maybe tell what kind of layer 2s exist and how to pick the best layer 2, why the fees are still higher than Solana and things like that.
Sure. So, so this site that you mentioned is called l2fees.info. And what I wanted to show on the site was, obviously, all these projects, both layer 1s and layer 2s, are competing to try to lower fees. Users often can't afford the really high fees on Ethereum. So everyone wants to make it easier for users to access those. The problem with comparing fees is layer ones often lower their fees by basically trading off decentralization. There are some blockchains that they haven't really solved any technical problems, like any real technical scalability problems. They've kind of just said like, well, you need to run like a really powerful server to run a node of this network. So to me, that's not actually scalability. That's just kind of making a trade-off. Like you can go to Google Sheets, or you can go to a like Postgres database. It'll have really high scalability, but it'll be just one computer. You've now completely gotten rid of decentralization, and you only have like quote unquote scalability. The cool thing with layer 2s is, in theory, they can maintain the nice properties of blockchains of being decentralized and secure, but also having like the low fees that users want. So for l2fees.info, we show these different layer 2s and what the fees are on those layer 2s, so that users can kind of see like, if I move to these layer 2s, how much does it cost for me to do basic actions? Like how much does it cost for me to send somebody ETH? How much does it cost for me to make like a token swap on Uniswap or whatever the exchange is on that chain? And I think this also gives like a nice like breakdown of not only like comparing layer 2s against each other, but also understanding like the state of layer 2s. How far have we gone to achieving our goals and making Ethereum like affordable enough to use? A lot of people might remember there was a quote from Vitalik back from many years ago where he was like, the internet of blockchain shouldn't cost 5 cents to send a transaction. It's kind of absurd. And this is a quote that many people will bring up when they're complaining about Ethereum. They're going, oh, Ethereum is so expensive. And Vitalik used to make fun of other chains. He used to make fun of Bitcoin for costing 5 cents. That was too expensive. And now Ethereum costs like, at the peak, it was costing, I don't know, $20 to do like simple transactions. So I think this site's like a nice example. Whenever I see the fees are getting below 5 cents, it's like, okay, we're doing it. We're kind of meeting the Vitalik level for a low fee.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So do you think that's ever a place that Rollup will not fit into Ethereum as the result? Because, yeah, layer 2s are mostly rollups, and rollups need to put their proofs into the public network, which is Ethereum, because they're scaling Ethereum. And I don't know, like how many projects right now in layer 2s, maybe a dozen or so. Do you think that Ethereum will run out of space and only run on rollups eventually?
I mean, I think the end state of Ethereum is for, the layer 1, the Ethereum everybody's used to using, will be like, it won't be a place for users to use, because, it'll be, the block space is not really going to increase on Ethereum. So we can assume the layer 1 is just going to get more and more expensive. And that the primary use of this really expensive block space will be for settlement of things like rollups. Maybe it will be some very high value market makers doing some settlement between rollups and things on layer 1. But, most users will probably never ever touch layer 1 eventually. But the interesting thing is, I think as this technology is maturing, in the past we just had like blockchains. There was just many different layer 1s essentially. And then we got this idea of, okay, there's layer 1s and layer 2s. But I think the narrative is shifting more towards this idea of modular blockchains, that they're not necessarily just layer 1s and layer 2s, but there's different entities that serve different purposes. So some people will say there are settlement layers, execution layers, and data availability layers. So in the past, most blockchains did all three of those at the same time. They would have the data availability, the execution, the settlement. With rollups, we're kind of taking execution and putting execution in this one entity, the rollup, and Ethereum is providing both data availability and settlement. But it's possible to break that up even further. You've got some projects like ZK Sync. They're providing kind of an off-chain data availability layer. They call it ZK Porter and ZK Sync. But I know some other projects have very similar type things. And then you even have projects like Celestia, where Celestia is a blockchain that's just a data availability layer. It's like the simplest blockchain because it doesn't really do anything other than just let you post data. So, the idea is you could have what we now refer to as a rollup, an execution layer like Optimism or Arbitrum or ZK Sync that's settling on Ethereum. It's kind of like, the token balances are ultimately ending up on Ethereum. You kind of bridge to and from Ethereum, but the data ends up on something like Celestia. And then, that's like a simple, like modular blockchain stack. But then, of course, you could have many different execution layers, settlement layers, data layers, all kind of interacting. You can have execution layers running on top of other execution layers, which is what projects are referring to as like layer 3s right now. So I think we're going to see this kind of like explosion of different ways of like structuring blockchains. And it's kind of like a computer when you think of like in the past, computers used to just be like computers. And then you got to the point where you had, okay, no, there's like a graphics card that does one thing and a hard drive does one thing. You've got these different components and you can choose if you want like a really good graphics card, a really good CPU, really fast memory, things like that. That's kind of what blockchains are going to end up looking like.
Andrei's smiling because he works at ZK Sync.
Yeah, and I work in ZK Sync, but not only in ZK Sync. I'm the guy who do these things which you call the ZK Porter.
I'm glad I picked the right example for that that question then.
Yeah, but coming back to the layer 2 fees, and we have two different types of layer 2 or three layer 2s for now. It's like optimistic rollups and ZK rollups, and one of these technology based on the fraud proofs, another one based on the validity proof. In this case, when you try to do some transaction in the rollup, you always pay full price of the transaction because your transaction will be committed to layer 1 and it cannot be reverted in the simple way. So, but in the case of the optimistic rollup, you always have this potential amount of the transaction fee which you need to pay if something went wrong in the optimistic rollup. Is the block producer on the optimistic rollup just push invalid state, so you need to prove invalidity of the state. First of all, can we calculate the amount of money that we need to spend in the case of malicious validator in the optimistic rollup, and do we have this metric now?
So the metric being like, what is the amount? Like, what's the maximum value that can be secured by this?
No. The amount of fees that you need to pay in the pessimistic case, because what as I understand that your site showing to us like the amount of fees that you need to pay in the optimistic case if the block producer do not try to cheat.
So you're talking about fees paid by users or fees paid by like the challenger of a optimistic proof?
But like the challenger have some incentives to pay this fee, of course, and he gets the money. But like in the end, you can have scenario where there is no real incentives. The treasury which will pay this money will be empty. So the user, if they want to withdraw money or do something, they need to pay transaction fee for execution of fraud proof. So that means that you spend more money if you try to secure your money in a pessimistic case. More money than you can see in the optimistic metrics, let's call it.
Kind of what you're asking is, what are the incentives for someone to like post a fraud proof in the case that there's fraud or something. But the main incentive that the prover gets for like disputing an invalid block from an optimistic rollup, it's the bond that the sequencer posts. So it's not, I think, connected to the fees that the user is paying so much. It's just this if you want to become a sequencer on like Optimism or Arbitrum, I believe you have to post a bunch of ETH. I don't know how much ETH it is, but it's obviously proportional to how much the chain can secure. So if it's 10 ETH there to be secured, then anybody who sees fraud, they're incentivized to post it because they can earn that, like they can slash the sequencer and get that 10 ETH. So I don't think the amount that the user pays in fees is like affected by that so much. I guess the sequencer does want to make sure, because the sequencer is earning some of the fees that the users are paying. So they probably want to make sure if they have to post 10 ETH or 100 ETH or whatever as like collateral, that they're going to earn that back from the fees that the users are paying. I'm not sure the exact like state and economics of what being a sequencer and how much they have to post and things like that.
But what I can hear right now is that you need to collateralize 100% of the money that was transferred exactly in some block in the optimistic rollup. But is it possible, for example, if you try to use like flash loans on the optimistic rollup side, where you loan like millions of dollars, so you need to secure your rollup in the same amount of money?
Yeah, again, I'm not sure the exact economics of. I don't think you need to collateralize all the value that exists in the layer 2 with that bond, because obviously that wouldn't scale very well, right? Like you can't have one sequencer that has to post. I think we all hope that these things will eventually have like billions of dollars in value, and you can't expect one entity to put up that much collateral. So I don't know. Again, the game theory of how much value needs to be posted as collateral compared to how much value is in the chain, but I'm sure there is some relationship there, and that's probably something that people need to be aware of in terms of like how secure their value is in these optimistic rollups. There's a great, we've spoken about a bunch of metric info sites. Lots of people might be aware of the site called l2beat, which is a really amazing site that ranks all these. It shows the total value locked in these layer 2s, and it also shows lots of the security properties of these layer 2s, kind of like what are the, right now a lot of it is like what kind of admin controls exist in the system, but it's also like what are the edge cases, what are the cases where your money could be frozen or stolen, things like that. I don't know if they show anything around this like game theoretical level of with optimistic rollups, but if not, like I think that would be a great metric for them to show, and I think their team would be really good at figuring that out, because it's a really smart people behind that site.
You mentioned the security level of different layer 2s, but maybe we can talk a little bit about the security levels of the layer 1s. Can we have like one generalized security index for all existing blockchains, which are proof of work chains, proof of stake chains? Because we know that like the proof of work and proof of stake, the security model is totally different. Because like if proof of stake is broken, it's broken forever. But if proof of work broken, it's broken for like sometimes for sometimes where the attacker tried to put more hash power to the protocol and try to reward some part of the protocol. What about security index of layer 1?
Yeah, so to try to quantify security, I think you would look at like what is the dollar amount needed to attack. Again, this gets a little bit fuzzy when it comes to like the proof of work side. If we look at proof of stake, the amount needed to attack would be roughly based on, how much stake do you need to have a like attacking level of value. Of course, this is different for different proof of stake implementations. Like Ethereum's proof of stake implementation is obviously different than something like Tendermint or Avalanche or Solana's proof of stake implementation. But there's some level of stake that allows you to have some attack surface over the network. So you'd say, how much stake do you need to do that? And, what is the dollar cost of that asset needed for that? For proof of work, of course, it's based on like how much hash power do you have? You have a controlling amount of hash power in the network. And to turn hash power into like a dollar amount, you need to look at like, essentially like what is the, how much, the financial asset that ultimately secures proof of work is electricity. And so it's like how much, what is the cost of electricity, which is of course different in different parts of the world, and how many hashes per amount of electricity can you get, which depends on the hardware you're using to mine. So it would be really cool. would love to see a metric like this. Maybe this is something that we can put together to look at, like, on an average case, if we look at like the most common proof of work mining equipment and maybe like an average electricity cost in a place that mining is common, we could maybe get like a dollar value for what is the dollar cost needed to attack a network and compare that to the dollar cost needed to attack a proof of stake network. So I think that would be probably the best metric we could come up with in terms of the, security of a network. One thing I'll push back against is you were saying that, if there's an attack on proof of stake, it's like broken forever and proof of work can recover. There is kind of the other, I don't know if I agree with that take because, with proof of work, you can essentially, an attacker can keep attacking, right? Like the system is somewhat anti-fragile because anybody can mine. It's a bit of like an external system, but if you have electricity and mining hardware, you can just keep attacking the network over and over. Whereas on a proof of stake system, first of all, when you attack, say you double sign on Ethereum, you try to do like a double spend attack. As soon as the network realizes that, it's going to slash you, which is kind of like, the equivalent on proof of stake would be like if you try to double sign, your mining hardware just kind of explodes. You can't, reuse that hardware to attack again. And if there's like another form of attack, where, some validator has a really large amount of stake and they're attacking, you can always have some kind of, like user activated soft fork to essentially like freeze or remove an actor from the network, which again, you can't do on proof of stake, you can't do on proof of work because, you don't know, the asset is a physical asset. It's like electricity and hardware. It's not a digital asset that can be like deleted from the blockchain.
But argument from the proof of work fan will be that we can have the same user activated soft fork and change the algorithm of hashing. That means that you need to build your ASICs from scratch in this case. So you will like have some time where the protocol can be more or less secure.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's kind of, I think, like the nuclear option is you change the hashing algorithm. But what you're doing is you're not just destroying like the ability for the attacker to attack. You're destroying the ability for anybody to keep mining. So you can imagine if Bitcoin changed their proof of work algorithm, it would remove like a potential attacker on proof of work, but you've also now, like any mining operation, you've now destroyed all their mining equipment. You haven't actually destroyed it, but it can't mine Bitcoin anymore. So all these warehouses full of honest Bitcoin miners are now like, they've been kind of kicked off the network. And you could imagine like, again, these are all very like theoretical cases, but if this was like a state level actor, say this was like the US government or some government that had a lot of resources that was trying to attack Bitcoin, you could imagine that they also might have the resources to mine on, like once you've changed the algorithm, you've kind of reset to zero, that there's no one that has built up this mining equipment, that maybe the US government also has lots of generalized computing hardware, and they could kind of almost be, it'd be easier for them to attack the new mining algorithm, whereas all the honest miners, they don't have any hardware anymore, so they've been kind of set to zero. So, I think this is kind of like a debate that will always go on between like the proof of work and proof of stake sides about which one is more like vulnerable to attack. There's certainly both advantages and disadvantages of both of them. But I think, so far we've seen like proof of stake's been worked well on a number of these chains, and I think other than Bitcoin, we'll continue to see proof of stake just being the dominant consensus protocol.
Well, yeah, there is another debate with proof of work versus proof of stake is censorship resistance, actually. So with proof of stake, like with Ethereum right now, there is like companies who actually own huge pieces of stake. So there is a question getting raised because it's not like all this a bunch of miners all over the world. Now it's like corporations or huge companies. Is it still so censorship resistant? So I know also maybe you can tell a little bit more about MEV and why it is good or bad, and general comment.
Sure. Yeah, this is good. I think there has been a bit of like misconceptions around the whole censorship issue on Ethereum. First, I'll say that like I think the censorship is obviously a big problem on Ethereum, and it's like something the community needs to be taken seriously, and it's something that like we need to think about like the values of the network, our values as a community. Like, do we value censorship resistance? Is it something we're willing to like fight over? Is it something we're willing to like make tough decisions over? And for me personally, like I think it strongly is. We need to like ensure that censorship resistance this is one of the main value propositions of blockchains in general. And, we need to, I want Ethereum to be a chain that's censorship resistant. And, I think we should all be working to make that a reality. And I'm confident that the community is working towards solutions, that we will find ways around it. But some of the misconceptions I've seen is that, I don't think this is something specific to proof of stake. There's a bit of like poor timing. The censorship in question came about from the Tornado Cash sanctions. And those sanctions were put in place around a month before Ethereum moved to proof of stake. And of course, it took a bit of time for like entities to start actually like censoring and adopting these practices. So I think a lot of people think censorship started when proof of stake started, but actually, one of the largest mining pools, I think it was Ethermine, I'm not exactly sure, one of the largest Ethereum proof of work pools was also censoring Tornado Cash transactions back when Ethereum was on proof of work. So this is certainly not something specific to proof of work or proof of stake. And I'd say it's also not that it's the main issue is not like that there's one entity that has stake that's trying to censor. It's that the largest stakers are using these protocols to earn additional revenue from MEV, from like miner extractable value. And the main relayer that provides these like block building MEV services is Flashbots, which is a US company that is still not very decentralized. And so Flashbots has decided that they want to be compliant. And so the problem is Flashbots is still like probably building the most profitable blocks. So lots of validators are probably it's not even an ideological or a legal decision saying we want to censor or we don't want to censor. They're just saying we can make the most money if we run MEV boost and we build blocks, or we validate blocks built by Flashbots. And so they're just maximizing their profit, but that is leading to some censorship. And of course, blockchains are kind of built around the idea that everyone will be greedy. This is how mining works, is you say, well, you can mine and you can attack the network, try to get 51% of the mining power, but if you play by the rules, then you'll earn rewards. It'll be in your economic interest to kind of act in the best interest of the community. And this issue of MEV is kind of challenging those notions, at least when it comes to censorship resistance. It's not, the networks are still secure, but they're not as censorship resistant because the entity that is providing the most economic opportunity is also one that is doing a bit of censorship. So I guess the other misconception is that this is something specific to Ethereum, because of course this is something that can happen on any blockchain as long as like the transactions are public. If there was, if there was a Bitcoin address that was sanctioned by OFAC, then we might see censorship on Bitcoin around that. If there was on Solana or Avalanche or some other chain, if there was some public contract that was sanctioned, we would probably see some censorship in those ecosystems as well. The only real way around that is to have, I think, some level of privacy, so that the companies that are like building and responsible for the censorship don't even know like what actions are in the blocks that they're building. So this could be something on a chain like Zcash, where you just have or a layer 2 like Aztec potentially, where you just have some zero knowledge proofs, and the validators or sequencers or whatever, like they can't censor because they don't know what they would need to censor. So, that's obviously one nice solution, but, the privacy has a lot of overhead. I don't think we'll ever get to a point where like everything is private. Of course, there's a lot of protocols that might not even work when they're private. Like it's difficult, if not impossible, to have an automated market maker that's completely private. You need to at least show like what are the reserves in the pool. So there's going to be, I think, a bit of like some balance, some challenge between people building protocols that are more private, which will in turn make them more censorship resistant, against protocols that are trying to be fast and efficient, and those might run into issues of censorship. But yeah, it's a big unsolved problem. But yeah, I think it's, as I said in the beginning, it's important that we talk about it, that we address how much of an issue this is, and kind of stick to our values and don't allow protocols that are not as censorship resistant to become normalized, because that's, I think, against what the values that have gotten a lot of us into this ecosystem.
You have site ethburned.info and you have site moneyprinter.info. In the first site, you show how Ethereum protocol burn Ethers, and in the second side, you cannot find any mention about Ethereum. That means that the amount of Ethereum that right now printed, it's not so simply calculated. So my question is, how it work? Why the inflation deflation politics in Ethereum so complex? What is HEAP 1559 and how it works?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The burn and issuance of Ethereum is probably one of the most like interesting parts of Ethereum's kind of monetary policy right now. You mentioned those sites, Money Printer and ETH-Burned. I think, we might not show Ethereum on Money Printer because eventually as well is to show absolute issuance and net issuance. So Ethereum is still issuing new ETH, and the plan is that Ethereum will always print new ETH, but that ETH is offset by the amount of ETH that is burned. So the amount issued is constant, or it's based on the amount of validators, and it's somewhat constant. But the amount that's burned is based on just how much are users using the network, how much demand is it for Ethereum block space. So that means when there's a lot of demand, when a lot of people are trying to send transactions, the fees go up, which means the burn goes up, which means typically now the amount of ETH that exists starts decreasing, it goes negative. And when the network is not being used as much, the burn is low and the amount of ETH is increasing. So I think that's a really interesting mechanism. You can contrast that against something like Bitcoin, where Bitcoin, there's no burn. Bitcoin has inflation, but the idea is that the inflation will kind of decay until it reaches zero issuance. But that's, of course, in around 100 years. So for the next 100 plus years, Bitcoin will be, the amount of circulating supply of Bitcoin will keep increasing. And it's, this number again seems to change day to day, but that will probably settle on some equilibrium where the amount of ETH in existence is slightly decreasing over time. And again, that's based on two components. EIP 1559 is the change that introduced this fee burn. Prior to that, fees would just go to miners, but now the majority of fees are burned, kind of taken out of existence. And then the other change was the merge, which just happened, a month or two ago. And the merge just decreased the amount of issuance. The amount of issuance needed to secure a proof of stake network is much lower than the amount needed for a proof of work network. So it reduced the amount of issuance to a level that was, that is often lower than the amount that's being burned. So that's where we get this kind of, equilibrium between those two values. And of course, the best place to track that is another really amazing info site called watchtheburn.info. Watchtheburn.com is another great site, but the really, I think, most popular one is called ultrasoundmoney.com, I think. And that shows a lot of really interesting metrics around how much is being burned, issued, and you can see a chart of the Ether supply over time, which, looks like it's getting close to going below the supply at the time of the merge. It's kind of goes up and down day to day. So I'm checking that a lot.
Do you have intuition about when we will have this equilibrium? How many Ethereum we need to print? Maybe 10% of current supply, or maybe 1,000% of current supply. Do you have intuition about it?
I mean, the amount that is issued and printed is based on security of the network. And again, I'm not an expert in the kind of proof of stake, the details of this proof of stake security, but as I understand, the amount issued has been decided. This is an amount that is sufficient to keep Ethereum network safe. So the amount burned is just based on demand. And so I think the interesting thing is that there's like a lower bound for the change in Ether supply, because if nobody's sending transaction, if the fees are zero, then we just have this very linear increase in Ethereum supply. But when demand increases, there's no like ceiling to how high fees can go. So fees can go very high, and the amount of ETH that exists can decrease very quickly. So this is, I think, something that we'll see is like, fees will be low for a bit, and the amount of ETH is increasing, and then there's like an NFT drop, and then the fees will skyrocket, and all of a sudden we'll start burning like, I think sometimes the amount burned is like 10 times higher than the amount issued. So we'll have these very steep decreases in supply. So yeah, again, the overall equilibrium, I think the equilibrium that we'll reach will be, like, this will be over a long time span, but I think we will reach kind of some equilibrium at some point where the amount burned is equal to the value of the network, because again, demand is valued in dollars. So I think we'll reach some equilibrium where the supply is somewhat constant, and then if Ethereum becomes more valuable, it'll kind of readjust and then reach equilibrium again. But those are on like very macro timescales. I think the exciting thing is to see, like, in a shorter term, how will like the markets react to these. We've got a few different markets. There's like the market price of Ether, and there's the on-chain market for block space. Those two markets are kind of like in equilibrium to figure out, like, and I guess the other market is how much demand is there for validators. So 3 different variables that are all changing and all adjusting each other, and we'll see how they affect each other. But I think the hope, as anyone who's holding ETH is hoping, that
to the moon,
that it goes to the moon. That we're burning so much ETH. Whereas just a few months ago, like, there was millions of dollars, I think millions of dollars a day of ETH being like issued on the market that miners were having to sell. Now we're like burning all this ETH, and that's maybe the market kind of has to reprice ETH based on that. But there's one thing that's for certain in crypto, it's that we never really know. These things are above any of our understanding.
Yeah, that's so very true. As a holder of ETH, I can relate. All right, so today I think we mentioned about 12 websites, which is like Cryptostats, Cryptofees, Layer 2 fees, Layer 2 beat, ETH burned, Money Printer, Cryptofees. I guess one we didn't mention, Ethereum nodes. I would suppose there may be more of those. And I wanted to ask, how many side projects do you have, David? Are those all your websites?
It's too many, and there's other sites that are. We've got one site that's really cool, that maybe by the time this comes out, people can check out, but it's I won't reveal the site yet, but it's something that shows how these different blockchains are like interacting and bridging value between each other. So we're still trying to build new sites. A number of the ones you mentioned are, most of them are sites that our team has built. There are other sites as well that I'm just big fans of, things like l2fees and DeFi Llama and Ultrasound Money. Those are just kind of cool websites in the ecosystem. But our goal with Cryptostats is to keep building new websites whenever we think there's some opportunity to. Usually, when there's some metric that we think is being like underappreciated, that would help people understand the space better. We're not trying to be like some of these data products that are really for like the data nerds to give them like tons of data to grind through. We want to like really simplify things down to a basic level, and just give people like one metric that they can look at and hopefully help them understand this crazy space a little better.
Yeah, this is cool. I can only wonder how to actually do DevOps for all of these things. Probably way more complex than just putting everything into one database, having domains and all this stuff. All right, I guess we need to wrap up around here. So this podcast was brought to you by 2 Ukrainians and David, who is very sympathetic to Ukraine. And thank you for being here with us. This is when we say, please, please, please help Ukraine fight Russia and donate some funds to the fund name savelife.in.ua/n/donate-n. So please help Ukraine fight the terrorist state and do not fund the podcast, fund the Ukraine. Thanks for listening and tuning in. Please subscribe to us in YouTube if you want to see our faces, or maybe Apple Podcasts if you want to listen to us, or Google Podcasts or Spotify. And thank you.
Дякую.
Sweet. Thanks, David.